So good evening, both to the living people and the Zoom people. I know. That's just a joke that I like. Well, at one point during COVID, it almost seemed that way. You know, you would always forget that people had legs, and you would. There's more to them. So that was a running joke in Amsterdam, and yeah, good jokes you should keep repeating. I think they become better. They age like wine, don't they? Yeah. Let me take a sip. I would like to start with a little meditation as a form of taking refuge. So please find the most comfortable position. And a good way to think about a comfortable position is that in reality it is our mind that tends to make us uncomfortable. And the mind wants what is not here. And it wants to hold on to what is impermanent. When it rejects what is present. And when it is indifferent to what could encourage, brighten, inspire the mind. When we talk, therefore, in Buddhism about letting go, it's not letting go of objects or people. It's about letting go of what makes us uncomfortable. Letting go of all that causes distress. That we may be present to this invaluable yet fleeting moment. But this is a moment of a precious human life. Which doesn't mean that we are better or worse than other living beings. It simply means that we have the capacity to question ourselves, to have a dialogue with ourselves. But such a dialogue never happens on our own. We are not islands. So apart from the beauty of our mind in the present when it lets go, you can also feel empowered by sitting here with others, equally letting go. Meaning that we get to sit here without having to live up to anything at all. Sitting here together, we are equally precious. When communities sit like this, the Buddha is among us. And please feel free to imagine or visualize him sitting with us. In any way that you imagine he would look like. A being that didn't and doesn't present himself as superior to us. But whose purpose it is and was to show us that we are like him. That we are his sons and daughters. Where his words allowed us to see something about ourselves that without his example we would have never seen at all. We would have never noticed that although our challenges come and go, the nature of our mind is free in and of itself. Like the sky is free from the clouds passing through it. Although that seems so obvious, it took him 3 countless eons to develop the qualities to show the multitude of different individuals the path to their own awakening. Not out of a need, but out of gratitude, as all qualities arise in relation to others. He taught us freedom and a path of freedom, not on the basis of blind belief, but surprisingly understandable reasoning. And in that he is a safe friend and companion. For having accomplished his own welfare, he works solely for others. To have refuge in the Buddha is to have a trust relationship with him and with ourselves. For we can only know him through ourselves. That means that we know ourselves in new ways through him. To have trust in the Dharma, to have refuge in the Dharma. So have to trust that the medicine that we have sought since beginning this time is already a part of us. It's already in our hearts. To have refuge in the Sangha is to know that we are not alone. We live in a time where not only the Buddha's word, but also his experience is still fully alive. We can learn about it firsthand. To have refuge, therefore, is to be seen. To be seen as having inexplicable value. Being able to feel free for not having to be anyone at all at the same time. Okay, thank you. That's maybe a good place to start as any, that we have all these beautiful, exquisite texts. I always joke that wherever I go and I say something, people end up with new books. There's actually a very good text that I think is called Sacred Reading. A very good book on, well, it contrasts a little bit modern academia in a way. That is why I did not like myself academia very much, because you end up running from one text to another. Now, I did a first year at the University of London, and by the time I started to have a taste for David Hume, we were already studying epistemology, and I was like, I would like to stay here for a while to come because this text is important to me. And so this text, this author contrasts our modern way of dealing with text, where we consume as much books as possible, and at an academic level, only often just to be able to regurgitate the information in one way or another, and then we move on. Where he says, well, sacred reading is to develop a relationship with a text, where it is not so much a passive activity, but is an endless engagement conversation with the content of that text. When I started my own monastic career, my own abbot said to me, Gendun, if you ever teach, then teach the Bodhicharyavatara by Shantideva. That will do. And so for the last 20 years, I have no idea anymore how often I taught that text, but it is so joyful to read, because whenever I teach it, I always restudy it. I will always find a new commentary by someone and then start from scratch. I don't think there will ever come a point where this text becomes boring. Yeah. And that's what good literature does to begin with. Some of you might know now that I'm a great fan of John Steinbeck, and I read Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden also 20-something times. And with John Steinbeck, what the wonder is that when you get older, you read the text in very different ways. You grow, and in that growth, you read what he had to say in many different ways. You also shift around in the characters. You are the young boy when you read it as a teenager, and well, you're one of the old. By now, when I reread it, I'm one of the old people in the text. But in sacred reading, it is different. The text tells you something about you, but your growth also tells you something about the text. And so that personal relationship is important, and that is equally the case with meditation. And so whatever technique you read, these techniques are true, but feel invited to apply them to your life, to find wording and a felt sense that touches you. Just to go through the motions and to go through the reasonings because, well, the text says so, doesn't do much. You must touch the heart. And that I want to go back to today, we must touch the felt sense, because we feel the world before we know it. Yeah. And before we start to think like, who are you? We have already felt each other. And that felt sense is dominant. And that is the nature of our experience. And we all know, and I made the same joke last Wednesday, but good jokes are worth repeating. How we know how weak our intellectual understanding is every 1st of January or 2nd of January. How we have a good resolution on the first one, and we have lost that same resolution on the 2nd of January. And so mainly simply to know that something would be worthwhile doing does not drive the mind at all. That the mind always conjures up excuses. That is what it's especially good at. Yeah. And so for that intention, for that resolution to remain valid on the 2nd of January, you need a felt sense. Something in your feeling must have changed, because that felt sense stays with you. And we all know that when you've seen an inspiring movie or a great book, that feeling remains with you for a while. It's like you stay in that book or in that film or in that piece of music, even beyond its closing end. And we use exactly that same aspect in our spiritualities, the felt sense that must change in order to be able to hold us. So when you ask me, like, how do you stay a monastic, for example, for 20 years, which I almost managed, is to cultivate my felt sense. I spend a lot of effort for that reason, cultivating my relationship with the Buddha. Like, who is that? Who is he to me? When I meet him, who do I meet? And why is that relationship important to me? So the texts are informative, but it's also very important to find your own voice in that relationship. Everyone, and that is one of the things that is so nice about the sutras, that you encounter a lot of different meetings with the Buddha. He was different things to different people. Yeah. And so sacred reading in this case, when we read the text, is meeting the Buddha in person. Like when you meet him, who is he? Or she, for that matter. Yeah. And then had to take your reflections, for example, when you take refuge, to take it from that starting point. It is about that relationality. The Buddha does not need us to take refuge in him. If he would need to, he would not be an object of refuge. He would just be like everyone else, wanting something from us in return. No, any divinity that needs our praise should first find freedom himself. A friendship with someone that needs something in return is not a friendship at all. That's an economical exchange. Yeah. And that holds specifically true with, I would say, spiritual ideals. Yeah. So the point is that the Buddha does not require anything in return. The Buddha achieved enlightenment in relationship to all living beings. So the Buddha serves us out of gratitude, nothing else. And the whole point is that he could explain that he was fulfilled. Yeah. And not in vague, abstract, transcendent terms, in some mystical terms, but in surprisingly straightforward manner. Does it make sense? Okay. You're looking very... Well, I have to check, like, am I talking past you or am I still talking to you? Yeah. So that's a good place as any to start. But last Wednesday, and I know some of you were not here, so I will repeat it a bit. We talked about feeling. Yeah. And that I was asked to talk about vipassana, insight meditation. But when you talk about insight meditation, you investigate something. And so then there's two things to inquire about, like what am I going to investigate and for what reason. And last week we saw that in the Buddhist tradition, what we investigate is categorized in four main groups: form, feeling, mind, and objects of mind, to say it in as simple terms as possible. And I emphasize at that point that, and there's validity to that, but we focus entirely, almost exclusively on the first one. And my argument was that if we are practitioners in the world, and I would say for practitioners in general, but especially for those that also have to operate out in the world, actually a much better object would be the second one, feeling. Because on the one hand, to remind us what feeling actually is. Feeling is an aspect of the mind. So the mind is like a mirror. And it mirrors, well, it is mirror-like. Mirrors are passive, but our mind is everything apart from passive. It actually mirrors its own constructions. But that we will get to, hopefully, this evening, if time is kind. No. I see my clock saying like, Gendun, no way. Yeah, I don't like you. I don't like you either. But simply to have something mirroring would be pretty useless. And there's actually good examples of that. I was a great fan of always of the books of Oliver Sacks that some of you might know, like The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Very important book by him. He was a neurologist from the UK that was a gay man in the wrong time to be a gay man, then escaped here to California, was also a bodybuilder, loved doing muscly things here on the beach and being a brilliant neurologist at the same time. And he writes in one of his stories that, and I don't remember the exact times, but like in the 1970s, there was a specific eye disease, or what do you call it again? What is inborn? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Where the retina is lying on the bottom of the eyeball. Some children are born that way, and so they can't see, and they never learn to see. And the naive understanding, the naive expectation of physicists was, of physicians, was that if they would be able to fix that retina back at the side of at the back of the eyeball, that people would be able to see again. And to their surprise, when they did that, is that they didn't see anything at all. What you get is just a barrage of information, but there's nothing in there. And so, if I remember well, the first person that they ever did it to actually committed suicide. because you have like noise in your mind. That is because we are very visual. I mean, much of the entire backside of our brain is there for visual input, and it had never been trained, so it doesn't see anything. And that is the way you could think of that. So the main mind holds all that data, but that data is in and of itself not very informative. It's just noise. And so there's other aspects about the mind that that organize that noise, one could say, into something that makes sense to us. That would be, it's a bit of a shortcut of an explanation, but I hope it gets the idea across. And so on the one hand, it organizes the world for us into things. We will see later on, this is a very important thing to keep in your mind. We will get there. But when you look at when you look deeply how we meet a situation, it almost gives you a sense of like a cascade effect. And so the first interpretation of the world that you encounter is not a knowing of the world, but it is a feeling of the world, which as biological beings is also very helpful. It's nice when you run on the savannah and when a lion comes your way that you don't have to take a dictionary to see what he eats again. It's nice to feel unpleasant and then, well, hopefully not run, because with lions that doesn't make any sense. They run faster than you do. And so that immediate feeling is an immediate but conditioned interpretation of the world. And we explored last week how this is on the one hand biologically conditioned, but biological conditioning from a Buddhist perspective is just simply part of a larger problematic situation of what we call samsara. But the main reason by which our feelings are conditions are previous actions. We act upon the world in a certain way, and that leaves imprints that causes us to experience the world in a certain way later on. If I behave negatively towards you, my mind has the inclination the next time that I see you to represent you negatively. And if I pursue you in a desiring way and so on and so forth, and next time around, the chances are that you will look much more appealing to me than you did the first time around, and so on and so forth. And so the world gets remade according to the expectations of created by my own actions, to keep it as simple as possible in terms of karma. And so feeling is both problematic but also extremely powerful. And when you look at what it does, what the Buddha highlighted in the sutra that I kept in the background on Wednesday and that I didn't use, but where he says, well, on the felt basis and the mistakenness where this comes from, we develop, first of all, sensual desire. We want things because we believe that that feeling resides in the object rather than in the mind. And so we are pulled by our own noses in a way. Yeah. And there's already great hope there, that when there's already an interesting misunderstanding of what you could, you can understand that when you would change that understanding, you would look very differently at these occasions and you could develop very different responses. But on the basis of that sensual desire, then we developed all kinds of views and especially identities. Again, much detail to be had, but very interestingly and very informative in our times is that all political research, for example, shows that if you want to run a political campaign, what you play with is not people's understanding. What you play with is their feelings. Because on the basis of these feelings, they develop identities. So you must make them feel in a certain way by appealing to specific identities. It's not about logic at all. And that people don't realize. So this feeling, sensual desire, opinions, identity, that is the order. And we have the distinct sensation that is the opposite way around. And because we have an identity, we like certain things and so on and so forth. That's not the way this works. And you can check that in your own mind. And so in an unquestioned way, therefore, feeling is very dangerous because it controls our behavior. If it is left unquestioned, and we talked about this over lunch when someone mentioned the fact that he or she was very attracted to food, it gives us the idea that when we eat, that is something that we want, but every time we look at the weight scale, we think maybe that's not entirely the case. I'm talking about me, not anyone else. Don't feel attacked. Yeah, but you know what I mean. Or when you come up to the supermarket and you're thinking like, why did I buy that again? Yeah. And so at the moment, the illusion is that it is willfully done. But in fact, when you look at even neurologically, when you look at what really happens, you see that it's the opposite way around. There's feeling, our intent is conditioned by our feeling, and then we appropriate it afterwards. The mind comes afterwards up with the idea that this is really what you wanted in the first place. And that is not the order of things. And I would say that is unacceptable. So in the case of lions, but luckily there's not many lions around, that works. But in most other cases, it would be good to be able to be aware of this and to ask, like, if to want to have that moment of reflection where you don't appropriate, you realize what feeling is, and you think, like, is this skillful or is it not? That is where that's an empowerment that you seek, which is a nice way of looking at things. Because it leaves to the side that we have to criticize the world. What we want is the freedom to decide whether or not something is truly skillful. Does it bring us what we seek, or does it not? It does not do that. And we would like to stop this automatic response. And we go a step deeper just to highlight what that form of insight meditation with regard to feeling would look like from that level, is to look deeply at it. So to use meditative absorption, use meditative calm, to simply keep looking at it, like, what am I seeing? And to notice gradually that it is not what you believed it was. Yeah. And so first of all, to discover that the feeling aspect comes from the side of the mind. The mind tries to say something about the world. That is conditioned. It is conditioned in relation to the object and of previous karmic imprints. So it's not personal in any possible way. Yeah. No one decides to feel in one way or another. So it is selfless as well. This is impermanent, conditioned, selfless. And thereby, for these reasons, it is unsatisfactory. You can't rely on it. At least in our current state, you can't. Yeah. And these are tough facts in the beginning. But interestingly enough, when you look at the sutras, you find that the Buddha actually talked to practitioners, talked to adult practitioners. Often the question is that you see, for example, in the Ornament of Clear Realization, one of the most important texts of our tradition, like, why did the Buddha start with the problem? Why did he not start with a solution? Well, there is publicity-wise, that would make sense. Like, this is beautiful state, and you're free, and you're happy, and everyone likes you, and they bring you offerings for free, and and this is what you have to do for it. But he didn't. He describes immediately the problem. But when you look really well, he does two things. For one thing, when his first disciples hear him talk, they realize that there would only be a point of explaining this if there would be a solution to this. And so from our side, when we run into this, and we live in a consumerist society, so this is tough news. And that means that all of this around us is not nearly as useful as everyone makes you believe it is. Yeah. That much of this would be a vast waste of our time, really. Yeah. And that's not always easy to accept. That is why the Dharma is also for adult people. On the one hand, because adult people are well placed in their boots, but on the other hand, if you're old enough, you will have run into the challenges of samsara. All of us end up at one point where we think, like, I've tried everything and I'm still where I started. Like, what is wrong with me? And the answer is nothing. Simply misunderstanding. Yeah. And only then that the Buddha starts with the analysis of the problem makes sense. Because when he says, feelings are unsatisfactory, when you're old enough, the answer is, yeah, I know. I've tried to satisfy them, and here I am. I've been doing this for decades now, at least as far as I can remember. And I have an important job, and I make lots of money, and I still feel as unsatisfied as I felt at the beginning, and maybe even more. Yeah. So how did I end up here? So in that sense, when I first heard the word of the Buddha at age 17, I felt actually addressed as an adult person. And there was no sugarcoating. Like, oh, there's nice angels hanging in heaven, and when you pray to them, I did not want that stuff. And when I got to the Buddha, I thought, finally, someone talking to me in an adult way like this I get. Yeah. Feeling is unsatisfactory. Yeah, I know. Feelings are not self. Yeah, I figured it out, because otherwise I would have told my feelings to do something else than what they're doing today. Yeah. And I felt that alone started my relationship with the Buddha. Like, okay, someone that talks to me like that, I hear. That is the way I want to be talked to. Yeah. I don't want to be promised fairy tales. I don't need castles in the sky. I need an end to my problem. And so then someone says, well, you have a problem. And that is now even common in modern medicine. Medicine, I think 30, 40 years ago, had no one wanted to tell you how bad it was. And they figured out that this is not the way to go. Patients don't respond well to this. Now, if you have cancer, then people should tell you that you have cancer. And if you're going to die, then people should tell you that you're going to die, because then you can do something with that information. To sugarcoat it is of no use to anyone. And then the Buddha, of course, says, well, but in this case, feelings have, this problem with feelings has a cause. And that is, of course, an eye-opener. Because if it has a cause, that means when you take the cause away, your problem ends. In this case, in the first analysis, the problem is obvious. I highlighted 3 different aspects that we normally don't see. We keep believing that not only is feeling coming from the side of the object, but it is permanently so. And we have that feeling, that inclination, that if we would repeat the same thing, it should feel again like that. While every experience that we ever had should have told us this is not the case. That's not the way things work. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If you keep, as with all these things, you can take your favorite song, but after a while listening to the same song, you would like to kill the artist. Because feeling, even in its best mode, indicates a relational need, a contextual need. But the moment we start to think that it is in the situation of the object itself, then we decontextualize it, and we will see in a moment why that happens. So when I'm hot, of course, I don't mind that the fan is on. But then if the fan stays on, I become cold. And then I wonder, like, how is it possible that the fan now makes me unhappy? Well, because my present feeling with regard to the fan just tells me that I'm very hot, and it can have a temporary effect on my hotness. But if you keep doing that, I become undercooled, and then it's no longer functional. And the same thing with food. In the best case scenario, my mind tells me about the food that it is useful because I'm hungry and my body needs food. But if I keep eating, at one point, my body does no longer need the food and it starts to suffer badly. Like, please stop doing that to me. And so to see here, on the one hand, that we have a mistakenness. We perceive feeling to be from the side of the object and to be permanently in that object, that the object is characterized by that aspect. And that is a profound misunderstanding that leads us, therefore, to involuntary responses that lead to unsatisfactory conclusions. And so that is pretty straightforward. And the moment you see it, you have a pathway to already, this is a pretty simple explanation. And this would already solve half of the problems in your life if you would stick to it. But we all know, it's challenging. It's challenging. And moreover, that feeling is conditioned. and that feeling. And that is very difficult, especially nowadays. I don't know how it is here, but especially in Holland, you know, it's become like a philosophical argument when you ask people like, why do you believe that? They say, I feel that way. I'm pretty sure that is a profound logical fallacy. And that is, I don't think that I feel that way is an answer to any logical proposition. Like it doesn't follow, but it shows how personal we take it. Yeah. And so to simply know it to be a conditioned phenomenon is very helpful, because it is exactly the mistake that we make, that my feelings are personal, that it says something about me that causes feeling to take hold of my mind. Yeah. I said that earlier somewhere today because it is true in a broad sense. And when you're trying to meditate, why do your thoughts distract you all the time? And as I said, because every thought seems to come with two labels. Like, I'm the most important thing in the world, and if you don't look at me, you have no idea what you've missed. And the second one, I am thinking you, or you are thinking me, or well, whatever way you want to pronounce it. It feels personal. Thoughts feel personal. And thoughts are exactly the same thing as feelings. They are just conditioned phenomena. They come and they go, and most of the time completely involuntarily. And that is the strange thing, that first of all, when you first hear that, you might think like, well, that is a not very positive description of what is so important to me, seemingly. But when you let that ripen a little bit, it's extremely liberating. And because it makes you more realistic to what feeling is trying to do, and it gives you the freedom then to discern whether or not at a certain occasion feeling is reliable or not, and to be realistic about how reliable it is. Like when I'm warm, that the fan feels pleasant, that is reliable, but I know it's reliable for a moment and not beyond that. So I don't seek more of that. The same thing with regard to food. I had to know that this afternoon food was nicely offered, so there's a moment of kindness and it feeds my body, does all that it needs to do, but not to want to sustain that moment, because I know it can't. And so to have no unrealistic expectations with regard to it, therefore frees you from attachment and desire, in this case with regard to food. But the same is true with regard to unpleasant feeling and so on as well. So far, still with me? Yeah. I think you need to use the microphone, that our Zoom people can hear us as well.
You mentioned feeling, sensual desire, another thing, and identity. Can you please repeat the third?
Views or opinions.
Views, thank
Yes.
you.
You want to be very exact. These are stages in something that is really worth your while to study. It's the 12 links of dependent origination. These provide a very good circle, both of how our perception works in the present, in a single moment, as well how we move from life to life. So to be exact on the basis, and there's different descriptions of that, by the way. And the Buddha was a prolific teacher, explaining things very differently for different people. But a very good description is that there's feeling. So feeling is very simple. And so there's a response of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutralness with regard to that. Then, if not checked, so if we leave our misunderstanding intact, there's an immediate response, which is sensual desire, which includes, by the way, aversion in this case, as a wanting to have it or a wanting not to have it. And there's two more, that is the desire to exist and the desire to non-exist. The one of existence refers to higher forms of concentration to which we can also become quite attached. And there's a debate over the form of non-existence, but I often interpret as, well, a form that we all experience. It's more complex than I'm now going to say, but we are left, see, there's an evil thing there. But it is surprising how often our mind tries to escape being sentient. And so why do we go to sleep when we feel depressed? Why do we drink alcohol? Why do we indulge in Netflix and so on and so forth? Is because the way we deal with our mind is unsupportable to the mind. And so when that becomes too heavy, the mind will try to non-exist. It will desire non-existence. So if there's a persistent feeling of unpleasantness, our mind will try to turn off, like, this is enough, I don't want this. And then that's called craving. And then the next one is grasping. Well, the translations vary, by the way. Sometimes I think we should learn them, but you should maybe use more Sanskrit terms. But anyway, I will not bother you with Sanskrit terms this evening. That would make it really complicated. On the basis of that, then that sensual desire deepens. So from wanting it, then you get an active engagement to obtaining it. And at the same time, we develop both our opinions around it. So from a desired object, do we come up with views why we desire it or have aversion to it? And so that's a complete afterthought, by the way. And that is why we dislike migrants to give a reason. There is no global reason to dislike them. I mean, migrants is just, it's a category. It's a made up thing. So there's nothing there to dislike. But at one point, unpleasant feelings were created, and then we generalize and we get lost. So these are views. These are views that are very real to the observer, but when questioned, you see that they're afterthoughts. They're responses to unpleasant feeling and not the reason for the unpleasant feeling. And on the basis of these views, we then establish identities. I am someone that holds that view. That is the whole process in a very shortcut of that explanation. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So I actually want to really thank you for talking about the relationship with the Buddha, because I am, or I was, a Christian, and in Christianity we talked a lot about having a relationship with God, and I really miss that after being a Buddhist, because I couldn't, it's different. And I'm glad you said that, because then it sort of gives me hope that I can actually cultivate that.
Yeah.
And so what I want to ask you is actually a book. What is the, what's the sutra?
By the Therigattas. I will actually tell you a very good title. I'm already reading it, so rereading it. Because I mentioned actually even on Wednesday, at the moment it's my favorite book, and all of a sudden I realized that I have a new translation of it. And that book is called, wait, don't worry about it. At the end of the book, end of this evening, you'll make Amazon happy. It's called, I just looked for the title, it's Poems of the First Buddhist Women. That is a recent translation by Charles Hallisey, Hallisey. And that is extraordinary. That's an excellent, on the one hand, an excellent translation. And what I like about this is that it contains, if you want to read it a second time, many notes. So it contextualizes these women, who they are. And that is very helpful. And there is another book, actually, that you should really buy. And these are, let me check that I say Analayo. The Daughters of the Buddha by Analayo Bhikkhu. He takes these as a basis and tells a little bit more about their lives. It's very extremely empowering. And Analayo, Analayo. Just look for that word. Bhikkhu just means bhikshu, a monk. Yeah, yes. Yeah. These are some of these two books are amongst the most important things recently published, as far as I'm concerned. Because we are one of the very few great traditions, spiritual or otherwise, that actually has a large collection of voices of women. The Buddha created possibly the first organization for and by women ever created 2,500 years ago. And many of them became exquisite teachers, and we have their voices still. And so there's lots of research now being done on them. It's as empowering for women as it is for men, actually. Yeah. So yeah, enjoy them. Yeah, so that relation matters a lot. And especially what I wanted to say, that's why I came up with that, is in the Therigatha you find, and I said that on Wednesday as well, so I'm repeating myself from time to time, but even the Dalai Lama does that, so I can do that as well. I'm not that old yet, but yeah, I would like to. But one of the things that I like about these stories is that it's not black and white, but more than with the men, because there's also Therigatha, which are the voices of enlightened bhikshus, monks. But the women are a bit more explicit on how it was for them to meet him. So you find a little bit more about their relation with the Buddha. And that is impressive. And it comes actually to what we discussed this afternoon in acknowledgement. What you feel is that he made them into, women were cattle, or worse than, had less value than cattle at the time of the Buddha. I mean, when you read in between the lines of those stories, it's terrible. These women had hard lives, unimaginably hard lives. And so when they met him, he made them into persons. He just acknowledged them. And all the verses are things that the Buddha said to them. Maybe I shall read one, two of them to you. Yeah, he plays with their names, which is really funny, actually. Let me think. Yeah. There's one moment that's called Tirika, and Tiri means actually elder. And so that's where the word Theravada comes from, is the tradition of the elders. And so she was given the name for different reasons, but here he says, now that you live amongst the Tiri, so she is now, this woman has now become a senior teacher. She became an arahat, an enlightened being. Now that you live amongst the Tiris, Tirika, the name you were given as a child finally becomes you. So sleep well, covered with cloth you have made, your passion for sex shriveled away, like a herb dried up in a pot. So he does mince meats, but yeah. Another one, he calls punya, let me see. I don't remember what punya means in Pali, so you have to forgive me, but the name you are called by means full. So he makes a reference to her now being full of wisdom. So filled with good things like the moon when it is full, break through all that is dark with wisdom made full. Yeah. So the ways he praises them is exquisite. Yeah. So yeah, that relation matters everything. Yeah. But anyway. And so that is the general way that Buddhist traditions approach feeling. So you meditate and you learn to look deeply. That is foundational practice. Now, to make it a little bit technical, if you think about in the 6th century, there was a little bit of debate, like what we struggle with is ignorance. There's something we don't know. But it was a bit of a debate whether or not our problem is a not knowing or a wrong knowing. Yeah. And so this evening, I will talk a little bit about what this specific tradition thinks about this. Yeah. Especially Tsongkhapa and the person that influenced Tsongkhapa, the great master Chandrakirti. And if you're in the in-depth meditation training, you will find out about Chandrakirti very quickly, lots and lots more. And so the basic approach is, one could say, an approach of exploring non-knowing. So you keep looking, and when you look long enough, it will start to appear to you that what you believed about it was not true. It becomes quite self-apparent. And so initially, because we look very superficially, feelings, for example, seem relatively sustainable. But once your mind really calms down, you see that it is. I often compare it, and that is also, shall I tell you this? Yeah, I shall tell you this. You are adult people. Yeah. My stepfather at one point thought it was a good idea to make a chicken coop. And he also thought, chickens need to be kept warm, and so they need lamps. And he thought it was a good idea to buy neon lights. He didn't realize that chicken actually have much faster optical nerves than humans do. They see it going on and off because that is what it really does. So for us, it seems stable, but in reality, it's on, off, very rapidly. So chicken go haywire when they have this, like living in a disco. Now, that might be fun for half an hour with music, although I never liked the idea to begin with. But for chicken, it drives them insane. Yeah, you need regular light bulbs. When you go in deep meditation, you see that feeling is exactly the same. That are normally, the way feeling is normally conditioned within us. And there's other ways to condition it, by the way, and we will get there in a moment. But that the regular way in which it is conditioned is deeply disturbing. It's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and in cascade so fast that you think, well, it's no wonder that I feel nervous. Because the basic felt sense of our world is like a neon light, and it drives you insane. And that is where, what we touched upon last week or last Wednesday as well, where calm abiding matters. Calm abiding teaches the mind to, or retrains, one could say, feeling, to become connected not to sensual objects, but to become connected to ethical states of mind, where where feeling becomes the mind's response to itself rather than to external objects. And so when you calm the mind, at one point you get a very deep, calm state, and it is so magnificently spacious and open and relaxed and free that the mind responds to it with happiness. And that is a very different felt sense. It's the same mental factor, but where normally it's like this flashlight, this is stable, relatively stable. So it comes and then slowly grows until it holds you. You have a pleasant feeling that is like a bath by which you are held. It's comfortable. It's also energizing in contrast to your fantastic bath, by the way. I found a bath in which I fit, which is for me quite rare. Usually when I'm in the bath, I have to choose which half of me I bathe. Like, shall I bathe my legs or my upper torso? But never both at the same time. And yours I can manage. Anyway, that's an intermezzo. Yeah. Yeah. Very nice, pleasant feelings. Yeah. And then once you get that point, you can extend it into wholesome mental states as well, where compassion and kindness and appreciation and generosity and so on are felt in an equal, pleasant way. And even where unpleasant feeling is no longer suffering, but becomes indicative of when the mind is unreliable. So when you enter certain moments and there's unpleasant feeling, that unpleasant feeling is no longer a form of suffering or less a form of suffering, and is more of a righteous guide. When you enter a certain situation, you feel unpleasant, you think like, well, this is the moment not to respond anymore. My mind is telling of itself that it is unreliable at this moment, that the information is incorrect. Yeah. And where indifferent feeling, neutral feeling, not normally leads to indifference, here leads to equanimity. So there's a very different way that one can feel when one trains in meditation. That is why calm abiding is so important. It's not a solution in and of itself, but it's a good in-between state. We need to be happy to practice a path. Doesn't mean you need to achieve necessarily all the higher stages of concentration, but to the extent that you can develop some calm, you will find that your life improves in major ways. And finally, of course, you can develop feelings that are related to liberation, but that might be nice if that happens this evening, but who knows, maybe not. Yeah. But you can, that's maybe the final point about Wednesday, when you realize that much of our pleasantness is actually a search for release, that feelings of pleasantness with regard to sensual object is actually in reality most of the time feelings with regard to an end of desire, then you get some understanding of what nirvana might be when you can end it permanently. Yeah. These feelings are then based on a permanent absence of something. You have a permanent release, and that happiness never leaves you anymore. Yeah. So this is a basic understanding. But where should we take? Oh yeah, I was with Vasubandhu. That was actually his argument. So what we talk about here things is forms of ignorance that are simply forms, one could say, of not knowing. Yeah. It's a bit more complicated than that, but I would like to keep it reasonably simple for this evening. So if you look long enough, it becomes apparent to you that these feelings are highly volatile, that they are conditioned, they do different things in different circumstances, and that they're truly non-self, because if they were self, you could make them behave differently, and they refuse to do that. And none of us wakes up on a Saturday morning thinking, today I'm going to be happy. And then Sunday morning, today I'm going to be unhappy, so that it nicely contrasts with on Monday again. It doesn't work. Yeah. And we all had moments that we were at a funeral and we felt surprisingly elated. And next time we were at a party and we felt completely miserable. And you think like, well, mind, can you please not do differently? You should feel miserable at a funeral and very happy at a party, and not the other way around. And so when we look deeply, that becomes apparent. Yeah. But according to both Chandrakirti and Tsongkhapa, in following Nagarjuna, it is a bit more challenging than that. Yeah. It is not so much that it is a not knowing, but it is a wrong knowing. We add something to the world that is not in there. Our mind actively conjures something up that is not to be found in the world. Yeah. And so that is more challenging to overcome. So simply looking in other ways is not enough. Yeah. Microphone.
Thank you. Venerable Gendun, how would you, if you could elaborate a little bit on the experience of release? You've talked about feelings tonight. So is that release of feelings? Is it like, we understand that it's non-attachment, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Or non-aversion. Is that, what do we release? We release the feelings in that case?
Yeah. We have never been without desire until for a moment you can end it. One of my teachers at one point joked that in our case, desire is almost an omnipresent mental factor. Our mind is always wanting. And we have no idea what a burden that is, because that means we can never stand still. That is why we feel exhausted and nervous and forced and so on and so forth. Yeah, and I see Louisa fully agrees. I'm happy with that. Yeah. And we're all very happy with your animated expressions. Please continue. I meant that in the most positive way, really. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, teaching that is actually very helpful if you do that. Yeah. Yeah. It means that my words are actually hitting their mark. Yeah. That's better. Like I told a few times from Mind and Life, and you see you sitting in front of all these professors that just looking like, that is really profoundly uninformative when you're trying to tell something like, am I going the right way or am I not doing that? Anyway, yeah. So it is worthwhile to learn to observe, and that's an important part. And you know that I've highlighted this. I highlight this very often, not to judge, but to learn to look. The looking is enough. There's no reason to judge it, because it's no one's fault. But to see really what happens when pleasure arises. That pleasure is not coming from the side of the object. There was a burden before. And what you experience as pleasant is when that burden leaves you temporarily. Yeah. And in calm abiding, or even leading up to calm abiding, you start to experience periods where they are longer gone. And for us, that desire is gone only so temporarily before a new craving arises. And that we really never notice that it is sometimes gone. But when you are sitting and practicing calm, and at one point you have, Thich Nhat Hanh says this nicely, at one point you will have 10 in and out breaths in which it is absent. And that is life-changing. Because 10 breaths is long enough for that to grow. And then all of a sudden you notice where you are. That's almost always also where it implodes, but that's a different story, because then we make it immediately into mine, and then we get completely lost again. And so we are very stubborn beings. Yeah. But you have had, where it begins is that you have 10 in and out breaths where you are not hindered, because otherwise there would be no calm. That's what calm abiding means. You're not disturbed. All of a sudden you have this vision of a very different life. This is what life could be like. You could always be like that. The problem is not outside of you, because that's what we believe. But now you know, I am sitting here in the middle of this world and I am free. Nothing pulls at my mind. And when my mind is like this, nothing can hurt me. Not possible. And that is an eye-opener. And that calm abiding mirrors nirvana, in the sense that what calm abiding does temporarily, nirvana does permanently. And so then you know, like if I take that and that would then be permanent, that will be amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Which is empowering for another reason, and that's for meditators very important when we practice ethical conduct. That's to find out that to resist desire is much more satisfactory than to fulfill it. So when you know, when you're looking at your fridge and you think like, and to say, no, I will not. Yeah, that is one of the reasons why monastics tend not to eat in the evening, because of course you have that. And you start to learn how much of bliss it is not to do that. That's much more fulfilling not to pursue it than to pursue it. Yeah. But I hope you understand that also it's not a black and white story. Yeah. Yeah. So far, you're still with me? That is. Yeah. But when you look at this story, as far as I've told it so far, so before I started about Vasubandhu, because that's another point that in the next 45 minutes, I would like to highlight. So on the one hand, I will explore a little bit with you what we add. So the ignorance, as Tsongkhapa, Chandrakirti, and Nagarjuna explored, is very different from the simple not knowing, not having noticed before. Yeah. On the other hand, the description that I've given you so far, and as we approach it on Wednesday, is still a lot about me. Yeah. And so I would like to read you from a Mahayana Sutra that explores the same feeling, but then does something remarkably different. And then I will explore the relationship between those two things, an incorrect adding to the world, and what the sutra has to say about how that makes us relate to the world, and how we can practice both these things at the same time. Because that is very useful for us as practitioners in the world. Yeah. And no one says it like the Buddha. I mean, yeah, I would really like to, but then every time you cite the Buddha, you think like, well, why on earth am I talking? And so the Buddha here responds to probably Subhuti, I guess. Here, noble sir, bodhisattvas, cultivating the application of mindfulness to feeling, attain great compassion for those sentient beings who dwell in pleasant feelings. And they train thus. Where there are no feelings, this is happiness. They cultivate the application of mindfulness to feelings so that all sentient beings will give up feelings. And here we talk about conditioned sensual feelings, to be sure, not feelings of awakening. And put on the armor so that all sentient beings will stop feeling. But they do not themselves stop feeling. Whatever feelings they have, they accept and experience them, all with great compassion. When they feel pleasant feelings, they attain great compassion for those sentient beings who act out of attraction, and they themselves give up the underlying tendency to attraction. When they feel painful feelings, they attain great compassion for those sentient beings who live in aversion, and they give up the underlying tendency to aversion. When they experience feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant, they attain great compassion for those sentient beings who live in delusion and give up the underlying tendency to delusion. They do not get attached to pleasant feelings, and so they defeat attachment. They do not oppose painful feelings, and so they defeat opposition. They do not ignore feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant, and so they defeat ignorance. Whatever feelings they experience them and know them as impermanent. They experience them and know them as suffering. They experience them and know them as non-self. They experience pleasant feelings as impermanent, painful feelings as a thorn, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant as peaceful. Here, what is pleasant is impermanent, what is painful is suffering, and what is neither painful nor pleasant is without self. Yeah. And so here the Buddha hits the nail on the head, as they would say. Yeah. He does something of exquisite and intricate detail. And I think that is the brilliancy of the Mahayana tradition. So just take a step back. And so what we're going to explore is the relationship between what we add to the world and our self-obsessiveness. If you look deeply, let's say that I have a toothache. When you look deeply at what we are really suffering at, it is not physical suffering, it's mental suffering. And what happens when you have a toothache, and that we also explored Wednesday, is that the mind goes haywire. Like, why me? And I don't need to tell you about that. You know that. We are all expert in that nonsense. And that is the real suffering. Now, to have an unpleasant moment with another person is, well, unfortunate. But the fact that the mind then goes on and on and on about that for hours and days and weeks and months, that is much worse than the original unpleasant moment, and so on and so forth. The real problem is the way the mind responds to it. As the great Ajahn Mun Thai Arahat said, we might in this life not overcome physical suffering, but mental suffering is a choice that we can stop. We are free to stop. We just see what it is. We don't have to do that. And so we could do that in an individual manner, but that would actually be quite hard. That's hard work. Because then you have to sit on your own, like, mind, stop doing that. And I think we all tried that. And that is pretty challenging, because that looks a lot like trying not to think about the pink elephant. Like, I shall not be angry with him. I shall not be angry with him. I shall not be, I'm very angry with him. You know? And so that takes a lot of effort. And that has many different reasons for which we don't have time. But it is simply to observe that it is pretty challenging to do that. And here the Buddha actually shows us a very different way. He says, rather than obsessing about oneself, if the mind is obsessing anyway, we might as well obsess about someone else. Because the mind, the moment we do that, we are relieved from mental suffering. It is as easy as that. And that is the brilliancy of the move that he shows. Like, I hurt, but hey, I'm a Buddhist practitioner. I'm living in a world with people that feel painful feelings. May we all be free. And the moment I do that, I change my object. It's very easy to explain. And the mind obsesses because, well, it gets lost, and we will see in a moment what it is. We get obsessed with concepts. All our unskillful emotions are conceptual minds. It's thinking that is the problem. We get lost in our thought. We believe that our thought matches the world, which it doesn't. And so the easiest way, therefore, to alleviate ourselves of mental suffering is to think about something else. But to think about a regular other thing is not very potent. But compassion is profoundly potent. Compassion is the opposite of what we were doing. And all living beings, when we here are compassionate, and we are compassionate to all. And so here two things happen. We change object. We change to it is so intricate that I could talk about this for a few hours more. But so I have to make choices, which is for me very, and you know, it's very hard. Yeah, there's never enough time. And the meditation training that I teach, I wanted to last for 20 years, but the FPMTs didn't think that was a good idea. I still think they're wrong and I'm right, but here we are. And so it takes away the object, but it also alleviates, as the sutra shows, us from the necessity of having to get rid of that unpleasant feeling, because we take the unpleasant feeling as personal. And here he says, that's not necessary. You don't have to fight it. In fact, to not take it personal is already to let it go. And we get stuck in it like all thoughts because we take it personal. It's my pain. And the Buddha says, it's not. Because if it were yours, you could turn it off. But you can't. No, you did not make it happen. You cannot make it go away. So why not just let it be? It's not self. Don't worry, just observe what it is. And that is strange. That change is very empowering. Because in that moment, you don't identify with it, you get power over it. Because now there's all of a sudden choice. And so now you have all of a sudden two things that actually start to produce happiness. Like to be compassionate, to be honestly and authentically compassionate is profoundly pleasant. It connects us, so on and so forth. And at the same time, you know, you feel empowered by having a choice whether or not you want to think about that or not. And that's also great. And so that is the move that he makes. So to give you some intimation of what is going wrong and therefore a deeper understanding of why this practice shows something right. And it has to do with our concepts. So we have two very distinct categories of mind. And to be very scholastic about it, we have direct perceivers, seeing and hearing and tasting and touching and so on and so forth. And we have thinking minds. And one of the challenges that we have is that these two forms of awareness are profoundly interlinked. Interlinked. Yeah. In more ways that I can explain in half an hour. Yeah. But just to lightly touch upon it. And tomorrow, hopefully, we will have time to explore some of these things in meditation. But so on the one hand, how concepts play a major role in the way we categorize the world. And we think that the world of things as we see it is a given. But when you would think a little bit about it, you quickly figure out that it is not. I see a table, but when a fly comes into this room, this is not a table because tables make no sense to flies. Tables are things for human beings. You can't tell what he sees. We will never know. There is some relationship between these two visions, but not the fact that it is table. He might, because it is another biological being, he might agree to the fact that it is solid. But there are definitely beings out there as well for them for whom this is not solid at all. And so for a hungry ghost, this is not solid. And so there's all kinds of, and you can't tell what another being sees. This is a table for human beings. And so as neurologists nowadays correctly say we don't see, we recognize. And we learn how to see. Young babies don't see. That was the problem with the people that had their retinas fixed later on in life, because they had never had the time to train their visual cortex in navigating, in using concepts to learn to organize the world. But they can't organize the world, and therefore they don't see anything at all. They can't see. For them, there is no understandable data in there. There's nothing, there's just barrage. And so that's definitely one aspect to them. And so we use concept to make sense of the world. But at the same time, the concepts themselves are always generalizations. And so to give you an example of, well, let's start with what we will look at tomorrow with regard to the person itself. And so when I think of I, what do? I can conjure up an image of me, and I can sort of turn that around. And I can see that thing in different circumstances, outside, inside, here 12 years ago, here today, and land of medicine Buddha, and so on and so forth. Later moments, earlier moments. And I can think of myself completely on my own. Like Gendun. I can think of me without having to think of you. And Tsongkhapa and Chandrakirti argue none of these things is possible. All these things suggest something that is profoundly untrue. They work as a generalization, but generalizations are never true. That is also, for those of you amongst you who are scientists, there's a major challenge, a major hiatus between theories and reality. They're approaches to reality, but they're not equal to reality itself. We try to approximate some aspect of reality, but they're not reality. And that what is true for all our theories is true for our concepts, because all our concepts are social theories. Yeah. And there's so much to elaborate here. Again, 10 years would be nice. Yeah. But here we are. It's not happening. Because in reality, to give some examples of this, when we look at photos of our lives, we have this immediate identification as though I was there. That only works because we recreate the past in the present. And so it's a complete illusion. Luckily, I always joke that luckily there was some progress between my baby photos and now. Because if that is the same me that is there, then I would still be pretty dependent on my mother for, well, everything. And there's a famous photo of me in which I look pretty stubborn, pretty cool photo, by the way. That's my only baby photo that I like. But that kid could not do anything. That kid was just fumbling around with speech. And with these little stumpy fingers, you can't do anything. And so it is the continuity of a person, but it's not the same. But that's not what I experience when I think back about the past. When I think about a moment in the past, I seem to be there. But that's a conceptual problem. That's because my mind generalizes all these instances into a single thing, and thereby comes to an image of me persisting throughout time, where in reality, I don't persist in time at all. I change all the time. Every experience makes me different. I'm a very different person from that 3-year-old in the photo, and luckily so. Life would make no sense if we would really stay the same, because then there would be no learning. There would be no function, then we do nothing at all. And so this is something that gets added on by way of our concepts. Moreover, it creates the image that I am something independent of context. But in all reality, when in every aspect of what I am, I'm completely dependent on others. We joked Wednesday evening that we have this weird expression like I was born alone, but that's a weird fantasy because we were definitely not alone when we were born. We were very much, we were falling and someone else was making a lot of effort. And from there onwards, every aspect of us was dependent on others. The food that we had this afternoon takes, when you calculate a little bit, takes thousands upon thousands of beings to bring it to your table. And without that food, at one point, we would cease to exist. And when you look at your own language that you speak, the hopes and dreams and ideas and whatever you have, skills that you have, we were not born with them. We experience them as such, like I am blah, 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 but I am nothing without others. Every one of these qualities that I appropriate are relational. I got them in relationships and they happen in relationships. Without the language that we speak, I would not even be able to make sense of my experience at all. I would not have any idea of me. No, when I can't make sense even of my visual data, how would I make possibly sense of anything else about my experience without our concepts and our language? So I would have no identity. I would not know that I exist at all. Does it make sense? There's an aspect beyond that, but I would like to leave that for tomorrow. And that is the idea, it goes a little bit further, that is in a very intuitive sense that I exist for my own side. But that's a complex one. Yeah. I would like to highlight that second one. That our ignorance, that what the interaction between our concepts and the real world adds to the world, creates that sense that I am an onlooker at the world. It creates that sense that I am separated from the world. And in fact, we have that even internally. We feel separated. And that is the one aspect that we also looked at last Wednesday. And we often have a very strong sense of alienation towards our own body and our own mind. And when you look at your own body and you think, well, you're not really good enough. You're too big or too small or too fat or too thin or too whatever. Like you could go to a supermarket and buy another one. I mean, this thing makes you. So what are we talking about? So that sense, that felt sense of a self that is separated from body and mind, that is its owners, is distinctively and profoundly unskillful and psychologically damaging. But more importantly, it creates a sense of a self that is outside of the world. And you see that even in our modern problems, that is why we destroy the nature around us. We have this weird sense that if we would cut down all forests, we would still be there, because that is what our conceptuality allows us to do. We can imagine, and there's even movies about that, that we run around in a world like At the Road, by that good book by McCormack, where this delusion that we could walk around a world in which there's no longer forest. But in reality, when all forests cease to exist and the oceans are dead, you're not walking around anymore. You can't breathe, because breathing is not something that our lungs can do. Breathing is a conversation with the world around us. And if there's no world around us, lungs have no function at all. So we are not onlookers at the world. We are not, and it's also like one of these things of our puberty, like we are in conflict with the world. But it doesn't make sense. It's a profound conceptual misunderstanding that we add to the world. We are not onlookers at the world, we are in the world. The German philosopher Heidegger says that beautiful, we are thrown into the world. We are permeated by the world. We are the world. When we really want to say something about, when I really want to say who I am, I end up telling everyone's story. Maybe I would have to start to tell you about my parents and my teachers and my family and so on and so forth, but they also have their own stories. And without these stories, they would not exist, and therefore I would not exist either, and so on and so forth. And in the end, you end up telling the story of everyone at all. We are the universe itself. We are neither completely one with the universe nor separate from the universe. We are permeated by it, and we permeate it ourselves. And so what do we do when our minds get into trouble? We fall back on that sense of alienation. And what is the deepest problem that we have when we feel bad? Is that we feel alone. But we can't be alone. That's not possible. my existence implies you. If I would be sitting here on my own talking away, and the ambulance would pass by very quickly. And like, there's a weird guy talking to himself a lot. Yeah. Or in my case, ice. I would get free retreat space. I'm still waiting, but they're not willing to serve me very well. Yeah. And sometimes humor is necessary. And so in my difficult situations, I impose a lot which seems natural, but one needs to question. Yeah. And so Tsongkhapa says, we need to actively analyze if what we seem to be seeing is actually true. Do we exist in that way? And to find out using logic that that is not possible. And so in all insight meditation, analysis plays a major role. And that is very important, that even in the in-depth meditation training, this leads to endless discussions, because we believe that meditation and non-thinking are the same thing. And then you encounter Buddhism, where meditation and thinking are the same thing. Although we'll see tomorrow that what we believe thinking is also not entirely true, but that is for tomorrow. But so Chandrakirti and Tsongkhapa say we need to actively engage with our perception. And so what we just read is that active engagement. So on the one hand, to ask oneself, does a self separated from others make any sense? So I seem to perceive that. I seem to be here on my own, independent of you, doing whatever I'm doing. But does that make sense? So does what seems so intuitive to me still make sense when I analyze it? And to find out, no, it doesn't. It can't be true. It makes no sense at all. Then once we start to understand that, that simple understanding is already quite liberating. But it becomes more useful when in our complex lives, when we have ways of engaging with the world that remind us of the fact that it is the case. And that is exactly what the Buddha tries to show here. So when I have a difficulty and when there's unpleasant feeling and I self-obsess around it, on the one hand, that obsession doesn't work, it creates mental suffering. But it also adds to my sense of separation. And so it involves both often what they call a reification of my problem, but in the middle of that is a misunderstanding of who I am. Yeah. And so what he says, at that moment when I have painful feeling, and I reach out to others, and I think, may all beings, may we all be free of painful feelings, that compassion is realistic. Because it says we're all in the same boat, but you are me. I am part of that larger body without which I would not exist at all. So by looking out for others with my compassion, I show myself to myself in a way in which I truly exist. I exist interdependently. And so here I achieve something profound. So I alleviate myself of my mental suffering. I produce well-being by generating wholesome emotions, but moreover, I block out the central ignorance on which my self-obsession is based. Me is a separated sense of self, a me that exists regardless of time, space, context, that exists in and of itself from its own side without relying on other things. As we will see tomorrow, not only does such a self not exist, I exist only in dependence. There's nothing from my side that is independent. I am dependent on my parts. I am dependent on an enormous web of causes and conditions. And I'm dependent on language. I am, in all these aspects, I am interconnected. And so to reach out to others and to be compassionate is to see oneself all of a sudden as I exist. That I exist as a part of you. And thereby to be liberated from my mental suffering. Does it make a bit of sense? The microphone.
Venerable Gendun, I just had a thought. When you said that we depend on language, I thought about you saying earlier how we also depend, how our eyesight depends on concepts that we develop, how we perceive a world visually, conceptually. And then we also depend on language. So potentially, if we can change our language,
Oh,
then we change the concept, and then we change everything else.
See, that's why we need a 20-year program.
Okay.
Well, it's very true. I mean, and so when my mind self-obsesses, what it perceives, the self that it perceives is non-existent, actually. That only exists in fantasy. And that's profoundly useless. And indeed, when I then deploy compassion, I still observe, of course, a person. A person exists. I exist. The Buddha never denies that things exist. He just says we have no clue how things exist. We believe that things exist in and of themselves. We believe that this is a table because there is tableness here. And the Buddha says there's no such thing. The table is a completely dependent and existent, but completely dependent phenomenon. It depends on its parts. It depends on trees and wood makers and designers and whatever. And it depends on us being human beings that make use of tables. So for us, it's a table. But outside of these dependencies, there is no table. There's no tableness. The table does not come from its own side. The table exists only in dependence on what is not table. So it's completely, in that sense, completely integrated in the world. It's not an isolated phenomenon. When you ask yourself, how is a table? Then if you would want to give the final answer, you would again have to start a description sort of at the beginning of the Big Bang. And that is the marvel. And to quote myself for a change, I do say good things sometimes. No, quotable things. Yeah. But it's a wonderful way to think, because at one point I said, and that's, you have to feel that. And it is something that hopefully will come at one point to your meditative life, is that the sense of a separated self-existing self is an enormous burden. I can't begin to tell you how heavy that weighs on your shoulders. When you discover it initially to be empty, that is challenging. Because it almost compares to, how to say this, in a skillful manner. Now sometimes, and that might be experience that many of us share, sometimes to compare to something, to give like a felt sense to it. And sometimes we have all faced for prolonged periods of time very great difficulties. And like I cared for my dying mother for quite some time. But the caring for her was good, but the situation was anything but that. And then when it stops, when that situation stops, you don't know who you are anymore. And that can be quite challenging. You know, my mother passed away when I was 17, and then it was exactly that, just silence. Like I have no idea where to go anymore. I don't know anything. I don't know anything else anymore. And that is the initial aspect in that meditation as well. Something drops. And it takes a moment to find footing in there. But if you look really deeply, if you then look a little bit onwards, you find that it is not nothingness. That in fact to be empty of self is to be full of everyone else. You were looking for an isolated self, and what you find is your network, is your web, is your family. And then you realize I was never alone. That doesn't make sense. I am life itself. And then you get a, rather than the separated sense of self, you get a deep sense of an integrated self. Where your person is fully integrated in your body and mind. Body and mind are not self, but they both produce you, but they're also dependent on you. There's a relationship. And it's the same thing between us. Now we are having, well, I'm having a conversation to you. But what we don't really see, what our ignorance prevents us from seeing, is that this dynamic happens between us. If I would have to say where Gendun is not in here, Gendun is here. Gendun happens between something inside and something outside. And once you see that, that felt lived sense is so different. And then you become, and that is what the Buddha is. That is my favorite aspect of, my most precious aspect of the Buddha. The Buddha is not self-important. The Buddha is not my superior. The Buddha is not something that looks down upon us and gives us rules and punishes us when we don't follow the rules. The Buddha knows, the Buddha sees that he is full of us. And so he's a servant. His function is one thing, is to take care of all that on which he depends. And so when you can do that, when you can have that sense of personhood, and maybe to throw that into the mix just to give you a wonderful taste of this, the Abhisaminamkara, the ornament of clarification, one of the texts that describes the different paths that we can walk towards freedom. It describes 3 types of bodhisattvas. And the first, and these are roles to play in a way. And to some extent, when you practice, you will end up playing all of them. Ryan is trying to play the first one. He's the king bodhisattva. No, I'm just kidding. Sometimes you need to take leadership. Yeah, and that can be sometimes a role when you know where to go, and the rest doesn't need to go, and there's urgency to go somewhere. That's a role to play. As I said, the other one is the ferryman. You walk with someone, and sometimes it's also not necessary. Sometimes someone just needs a friend. Just to be encouraged by, like, I'm walking with you. It's going to be fine. You take your time. I'm here. Don't worry about it. And the last one is the shepherd-like bodhisattva that walks behind the sheep. The shepherd-like bodhisattva seeks nothing but the safety of the sheep. He's the last one that goes anywhere. And it is said that of the 3 types of bodhisattvas, although all bodhisattvas have to perform all these functions, it's the shepherd that gets to enlightenment the quickest. Yeah. And so when we feel separated, then our function is profoundly hampered by our own ignorance, because we set ourselves up for failure. The manual that our perception presents to us is not useful. It tells us nothing about the world. It tells us nothing about who we are. And that is why we often feel so fearful and stressed and worried and so on and so forth. Because we try to do the right thing and still we fail. But that's because our ignorance does not tell us how we truly exist. But when we become servants, servanthood is an appropriate position, is an appropriate model strategy for being a person. Because if I exist in dependence on you and on my body and in my mind, then if I want to function well, I should make sure that you and my body and my mind function well. Because you are all my conditions. I exist only in dependence on you. So if I want to be a happy, functioning person, then that is what I should care for. And so when we act in our different roles in the world as servants, however we need sometimes to express that servanthood, it is always a good guide for our intent. Because then in any situation, you can ask yourself, like, body, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling heavy? Are you feeling light? Are you tired? Are you awake? What do you need? In my case, it's easy coffee. But that's a good answer. Yeah? And then to look at the mind. Like, mind, where are you? Are you distracted? Are you dull? Are you feeling well? Are you not feeling well? What is happening to you? And then to provide the mind that with what it needs. In this case, for example, to see that it is suffering and thinking like, well, with that state of mental suffering, I can't do anything. So I might, and that coming back to your question, I can then look at the world rather than from a problematic perspective, in a compassionate perspective. So I have a lot of freedom in determining how I perceive the world. And sort of think like, okay, so if I look at you in that way, like, oh, may you all be happy, then my mind feels very different all of a sudden. It's much more buoyant and bright and so on and so forth. So then I find all the means within myself, like, okay, so now I've navigated within me. And then I can look outside, like, where are you today? And what happened here in the city today? What happened in your lives today? Is it late? Is it early? Are you tired? Have you worked hard? Have you driven a monk around all afternoon? And so on and so forth. And to take that into account and to the best of one's capabilities, to think like, okay, so what is the right evening? And what is the way I serve you? And then to start from there. And then to find when you do that, you can completely forget about the self. Because once you've answered these questions, then the rest happens. And in all moments where we function well, we always forget the self. The self is just a concept, a simple strategy. And once you have decided which one it is, we all want to let it go. Why do we go to concerts? Because when we enjoy a piece of music with others, we forget ourselves. We feel part of something larger than ourselves. Why is surfing fun? Although for me it's not fun. I fall off the board, but that's a different situation. But I can imagine that it is fun because you feel part of the waves and the wind and the board and the movement and so on and so forth. No, public speaking is only fun when you can just sit back and your mouth, your mind just does it. It knows what to do. You see these things coming by themselves. That is fun. And you feel whole. And we all know that. We all have our own experiences with that, I think, to some extent. Yeah. That's what and that is what Buddhahood in the end is all about. Had the great master Dogen, and it's a nice way to end this evening. Had a great master Dogen says it in a Shobogenzo, and let's see if I can quote it well. I always forget one sentence in between, so here you are. And that's my caveat to begin with. But he says beautifully, to study the Dharma is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be illuminated by all things. And that is what we can do in any moment of our day. Because this is the Dharma. The Dharma in the end just means this is it. Not what we believe it is, but what it really is. And then we can forget, because all things that we then see in their true light will illuminate and guide our actions. Then we are free of worry, free of doubt. Make sense? So that's what my Jamikas do. Everyone convinced on Zoom? Louise? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy. Yeah, yeah. That's what I like about it. I know, like, good things should be. When I first heard the Dharma, I thought, yeah, of course. Like, why did I not think of that before? Yeah? Yeah. Once you see it, you realize it could have never been different. Yeah. And that is Yeah, I ramble on now a bit, but as the Buddha says, samsara and nirvana are the two sides of the same coin. It's the way we look. When we see the way things are, we are free. It's done. It's that simple. So, I'm not sure why. Are you enlightened yet? Yeah, that's the other thing that I mean, the Buddha did all the time. He would say something, or even people would tell other people what he said, like Shariputra. Shariputra at one point is looking for a master, and he meets one of the disciples of the Buddha, and he says, no, tell me what the Buddha says. And he says, well, the Buddha says, because this is, that is, and this is not, that is not. Stream entry. Like, I just said that. Anyway, yeah, one step at a time. Yeah. Anyway, as we are connected to all living beings, let's take a moment, like the 1st of January, not to only understand it, but to feel it. Feel the real world deeply inside. And to experience ourselves as vast, as permeating this world. Both living beings, arahats, Buddhas. And to know that this moment is a gift. For which all living beings are given the most wondrous name of a mother sentient being. They gave birth to this moment of ourselves and of us coming together here today. But it was illuminated by Buddhas, by Cheka Buddhas and Arahats, for it is in their faces that we realize who we are. Not Buddha as an abstraction, but the Buddhas that we met. The Buddha's experience is still in this world. Can still be met in His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Many of us were blessed by the presence of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And other great teachers that embodied a lived experience of freedom. We may rejoice and hopefully a bit of freedom that we experienced this evening. Not as something achieved or attained, but to experience of gratitude. With the wish to repay that kindness. Not because we should, but what else would there be to do? And luckily for us, the aims of Buddhas and sentient beings is the same. to liberate all living beings into Buddhahood itself. But we can't do that unless we know ourselves where the doors of liberation are to be found. So through our merits of this evening, may we learn to serve, not as an imposition or a command, but because it is the only way to make sense of what it means to be a person. And with that, I thank you for your presence this evening. At least I had a very good time with you. So thank you for that. And if you want, I'm back here tomorrow morning. Well, I'm first of all on 6:30 online. And then at 10 o'clock, I will be here. And then we'll do a day of all kinds of meditative exercises, testing our hypothesis of today.
Okay, thank you very much, Venerable Gendun. So, just announcement for tomorrow, as Venerable said, we'll start at 10 a.m. and it's a day-long Mahamudra retreat. So more meditation focus from 10 to 4:30. And as Venerable Gendun mentioned, there's a year-long program that is on Saturday morning online. This is a global program, and it happens to fall in in the very early morning for us, which is 6:30 to 9. But you're welcome to enroll. It's like open enrollment, so you even though it started, even if you enroll today, you can still catch up through the recordings, and maybe tomorrow there'll be some time to talk a little bit more. Or
Say something about it. So to follow in the footsteps of Rinpoche, I always believe that, no, and we come back to your question. I don't think we should put teachers on pedestals. The Mahayana texts clearly say that bodhisattvas and Buddhas appear to us in ways that we need. So the purpose of their presence is to emulate them. And we have a wealth of scholasticism. But myself, I benefited a lot from meditating with others, but also having guidance, not always having to invent the wheel on my own. And so the in-depth meditation training is a way of bring our FPMT family together and to provide an ongoing platform for practice. It is 4 years, but the basic idea is that these 4 years keep rerunning again and again and again until we make it out of here. Yeah. And so we will offer that in collaboration with the Ocean of Compassion Center. And this also means that I will be coming back here annually so that we can develop over time an interpersonal relationship as well. So we are comfortable with each other. We know who we are. And because as they say in India, not everything that shines is gold. You need to figure that out if that is really true. To talk the talk is not that difficult, but to walk the walk is pretty challenging. And so we need time for each other to figure that out, what that relationship is between us. And so for that reason, I will be definitely here annually. But you're very welcome to either take a peek at that training or follow it. And it is a training not in turn, as I say, the training is devised in such a way that it's not trying to impose doctrine on you, but to wrap the doctrine around you in the way that you need. Yeah. So we meditate, as you know, together. I have no idea ever what I'm going to say on a Saturday. We figure that out together, but that means that what gets said is said because we need to hear it, rather than some book saying that it should be said at that moment. Yeah. Anyway, like that. So go forth and multiply your virtues. I have a Catholic upbringing. There's no escape. And thank you for being online present as well, Kimberly, Donna, Louise, and Urs. Yeah. Urs. Sorry, without my glasses, I see vagaries. Urs. Yeah, thank you for being here. Yeah. Let's quickly go home because I am working tomorrow morning early.